Have you ever wondered why your children visit home less often these days? It's not because they're so busy that they can't make time. It's not because they've forgotten that their aging parents are waiting for them at every dinner. It's just that every time they come home, something makes them feel exhausted, a heaviness they can't quite name, a discomfort they can't fully explain. Because if they speak up, they fear hurting their parents. But if they stay silent, the distance only grows wider. Parents often think the older they get, the more indifferent they become. But sometimes it's the parents themselves, through small, repeated habits, who unknowingly make their children uncomfortable. Not intentionally, not with bad intentions, just without realizing it. There are habits that have formed over the years, becoming second nature with age. But in the eyes of the younger generation, these habits blur the line between love and pressure. No one dares to bring it up. No one dares to speak frankly, because they care, because they know they owe their parents a lifetime. But if you're willing to listen with an open heart, here are 9 things elderly parents often do, things that silently frustrate their children, yet none of them have the courage to say out loud. 1. Constantly bringing up the past, over and over again. The elderly often live in their memories, the times when they were strong, when they overcame hardships, when they carried the weight of the entire family. And because those past experiences are so deeply ingrained, they tend to recall them, sometimes repeating them endlessly. When I was your age, I worked 2 jobs and still cooked for myself every night. Back in our day, we didn't need smartphones or therapists. We just got through everything on our own. Every word carries a sense of pride, a belief that they endured, that they understand life better than their children do today. But times have changed. Their children live in a completely different world, one where stress comes from work, rent, mental health struggles, and the relentless pace of modern life. A story from the past, when shared once or twice, can be a lesson. But when repeated every week, every day, it turns into an invisible burden. Hearing it once feels like a shared moment. Hearing it a few times feels nostalgic. But hearing it for the 10th time, just within a single dinner, feels exhausting. And the most painful part, their children don't dare to say anything. Not out of disrespect, but because they know behind those repeated stories is a life of hardship that their parents don't want to be forgotten. 2. Giving unsolicited advice. Even when no one asks, there is a very common way older parents show care, by giving advice even when no one needs it. Don't let the baby drink cold milk, it's bad for the stomach. The house in the Maple neighborhood is a better buy, quieter and closer to schools. Raising your child like that will ruin them. They'll walk all over you. Every word comes from love, but love, when given the wrong way, can turn into pressure. Young people don't always need to be corrected. They need to be trusted, to feel like they are parenting in their own way, not constantly living under the shadow of the previous generation. Because if every action is criticized, if every decision is questioned, it won't take long before they stop sharing, stop asking, and stop coming home as often. The truth is, sometimes all it takes is a simple question. Would you like to hear some of my experience? That small question makes all the difference. It gives them a sense of respect, and when people feel respected, they truly want to listen. 3. Refusing help, then complaining about loneliness. There are fathers and mothers in their 70s who still insist on shoveling snow off the porch every winter, still climbing ladders to change light bulbs, still driving alone to the supermarket, despite their children living just a few blocks away. When their kids offer to help, they brush it off. No need. I'm still strong. I can do it myself. It's just a small task. Then a few weeks later, they sigh. They don't seem to care about us at all. This contradiction doesn't come from stubbornness. It comes from pride. The elderly fear being seen as a burden. They fear pity. But what they don't realize is that by constantly saying, "I don't need help," they unknowingly shut the door on closeness with their children. Because for the younger generation, helping their parents isn't an obligation. It's a quiet joy. It's the only way they can feel useful in a life that often feels out of control. Sometimes all it takes is saying, "If you're free, I'd love some help with this." That's enough. enough to let their children feel like they're part of their parents' world, rather than standing outside just worrying. 4. Holding on to too much, both possessions and old wounds. In many suburban homes, basements are filled with things that might be needed someday. A wedding dress that has yellowed with age, Christmas cards from 1984, a broken radio that once played every morning when a couple still had each other, a whole life packed away in dusty boxes. The elderly don't keep these things because they don't know how to declutter, but because they can't bear to forget. Because throwing something away sometimes feels like losing a part of themselves, like admitting, that time in my life is truly over. But for their children and grandchildren, who are cleaning, moving, or trying to make space for a newborn, it can feel suffocating, not just because of the clutter, but because they're being pulled into memories that aren't theirs, a sorrow they can't touch nor fully understand. What if instead of hiding these things away, they were brought out, sitting together with their children, telling the story of the wool scarf their mother knitted in 1972, laughing, reminiscing, feeling, then packing it up and saying goodbye. Memories, when shared, become cherished stories, but when held onto alone, they become a heavy burden for the next generation to carry. 5. Using emotions to create pressure. Subtle but sharp parents don't always openly accuse their children of being neglectful. Sometimes all it takes is a simple sentence, softly spoken, but deeply lingering. It's been a while since you called. You must be really busy. You only remember me when you need something. I'm fine. I've gotten used to the silence. No anger, no complaints, no harsh words. Just a few gentle remarks, dropped at the exact moment when their child is already overwhelmed or exhausted. And because it's so subtle, it cuts deep. Deep enough to leave a lingering guilt that lasts for weeks, making them feel like a terrible child, a terrible parent, someone who never gives enough time to family, even though they are trying their best every single day. The elderly don't intend to be emotionally manipulative. They are simply lonely and unsure of how to express it. But if not careful, these light words can create an unspoken distance, making their children dread phone calls, dread messages, dread the guilt that follows. What if instead they simply said, I miss you. Let's meet this weekend. No blame, no guilt tripping, just an honest expression of love. And strangely enough, that softness makes their children want to come home more than any words of reproach ever could. 6. Crossing boundaries, especially when raising grandchildren. The love grandparents have for their grandchildren is a peculiar thing. Deep, tender, and sometimes prone to overstepping boundaries without realizing it. It can be as simple as saying, here, have a little more cake. Don't tell your mom, okay? Or, when hearing their grandchild cry, blurting out, your dad doesn't know how to raise you properly. Let grandpa teach you. The words may seem harmless, but to the child's parents, they feel heavy. Because to them, it's not just spoiling, it's breaking unity. It turns grandparents from supporters into quiet opposers. It confuses the child, making them unsure of whom to listen to, whom to trust. Between love and parental authority, there is a fine line. And stepping over it, even slightly, can throw the whole family off balance. Parents don't expect grandparents to follow every parenting book. They simply want to be recognized as the ones raising their own child, to be respected as adults, not treated as kids who still need guidance. A home can belong to 3 generations, but how a child is raised, that decision should belong to the parents. Because sometimes loving the right way means knowing when to step back. 7. Talking only about illness, all the time. At a certain age, the body starts to decline, aches here, stiffness there, and health concerns become a daily reality. That's completely normal. But if every phone call or visit begins with, I couldn't sleep again last night. My back feels like a rock now. I got another new prescription from the doctor today. Then slowly the conversation will be filled with nothing but sighs. It's not that children are indifferent or unwilling to listen, but helplessness grows when every interaction revolves around pain, exhaustion, and gloom. Young people already face the stress of work in a fast-paced, impersonal world. When they come home, they hope to find comfort in their parents, not an endless medical report. Try changing it up just once. Have you seen the new Netflix show? The neighbor accidentally cut into my flower bed yesterday. The weather's so nice this month, it just lifts my mood. The illness is still there, it doesn't disappear. But by choosing to share small, cheerful moments, suddenly, children feel lighter and want to visit more often. No one enjoys hearing about sickness all day, but everyone loves hearing that their elderly loved one is still living, not just surviving. 8. Comparing the past, like an unspoken competition. When I was your age, I was raising 3 kids on my own. Back then, we had no washing machines, no air conditioning, and we still managed just fine. You guys these days complain about the smallest things. At first, it may sound like reminiscing, but to their children, it can sometimes feel like an unfair comparison, as if today's struggles are insignificant compared to the past. And so, an invisible competition begins. Who had it harder? Who was stronger? Who sacrificed more? But in a contest between 2 generations, there are no winners. The past had its hardships. The present has its own burdens. One had to carry water through a snowy winter. The other has to pay rent that costs half their salary. Different struggles, impossible to weigh on the same scale. Children don't need to be told they have it easy. They just want acknowledgement that life today is tough in its own way too. Comparisons don't bring people closer. They only make children feel like they will always be seen as kids, even when they have long become parents themselves. 9. Silent resentment, expecting others to just know. Not all parents express their disappointment in words. Some choose silence, but a silence heavy with meaning, a solemn face when their child arrives late. Short, curt replies when a weekend call is forgotten, a dinner left unoffered, a glance unspoken, all carrying the unspoken message, figure it out. I'm upset. The problem is, children aren't mind readers. They don't hear what isn't said. They just sense the heaviness. And over time, they start to dread coming home, dread starting conversations, dread the very silence of their own parents. Older parents often think, they're grown up now. Why should I have to explain? But in reality, the older we get, the more we long for our parents to just say it, clearly, openly, without making us guess. Because not everyone who stays silent is understood. And not everyone who loves automatically knows what the other feels. A simple, honest sentence like, "Mom feels sad because I don't see you as often these days." That's all it takes to bring a child back home. Not out of guilt, but out of connection. Better to express than to silently resent, because sometimes silence can feel colder than the miles that separate us. Everyone will grow old. One day we will all find ourselves watching our children and grandchildren, longing to be close, to be heard, to be understood. But love, no matter how deep, needs to be expressed in the right way, so it doesn't turn into distance. Cherish each other while you still can. Say the things that need to be said. Listen with your heart, not just through old memories or silent expectations. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more meaningful stories waiting for you. Because life is not just about what we go through, but also about what we share with one another.